Hello and Happy New Year. Today is Tuesday, January 2nd, 2024. We'll explain a bunch of new state laws now in effect hitting on some hot-button issues. Also, what to know about a powerful earthquake in Japan and massive waves in California. Plus, what stands out on a new form for federal student aid, what it means now that Mickey Mouse has entered the public domain, and which movie won the New Year's box office. Those stories and more news to know today, next. Welcome to The Newsworthy. All the day's news in around 10 minutes. Fast, fair, fun, and on the go. I'm Erica Mandy. Thanks so much for being here. You ready? Let's do this. With every new year comes a new slate of laws Americans will have to follow in different states. So starting this week, new state laws are going into effect addressing issues like gun violence, book bans, and minimum wage. When it comes to guns, Minnesota now lets authorities ask courts to temporarily take guns away from people considered an imminent threat. That makes Minnesota at least the 20th state with that kind of a red flag law. In Illinois, a new law bans high-powered semi-automatic rifles and high-capacity magazines. And in California, a new law bans firearms in most public places. Separately, there are new state laws that address online behavior. Like in Connecticut, online dating companies now need to have policies for handling harassment reports. And North Carolina is requiring porn websites to confirm viewers are at least 18 by using a commercially available database. On LGBTQ issues, Idaho, Louisiana, and West Virginia now have new bans against transition-related care for minors, joining about 20 other states with similar bans on the books. While in Colorado, new buildings are now required to have non-gender-specific public restrooms. And California is becoming the first state to force large retailers to include gender-neutral toy aisles. Also, there are new laws about so-called book bans, like Indiana is making it easier for people to challenge books in school libraries. But on the other side, a new Illinois law blocks state funding for public libraries that ban or restrict books in any way. And then there are new money laws. 22 states are raising the minimum wage for workers, though 20 other states are still sticking with the federal minimum wage of $7.25, which hasn't gone up since 2009. Meanwhile, Missouri and Connecticut lowered their income tax rates, and Kansas lowered its sales tax on groceries. Of course, these are just some of the highlights. Other new laws impact marijuana, telemarketers, bail reform, abortion protections, and a lot more. The U.S. military has been busy in the Middle East trying to secure a waterway that's vital to global trade. But it's running into complications. Over the weekend, Iranian-backed militants attacked a large container ship in the Red Sea. And in response, the U.S. Navy sunk 3 of the militants' boats and killed their crews. Of course, tensions have been escalating for a while. The Pentagon says in just 1 month, militants hijacked a container ship and launched more than 100 drone and ballistic missile attacks, targeting vessels involving more than 35 different countries. The U.S. has accused Iran of being deeply involved in the attacks. Iran says that's not true. Then yesterday, Iran dispatched its own warship to the Red Sea, though it's not clear exactly why. Now, most container ships and a large share of oil and gas tankers originally bound for that portion of the Red Sea are being rerouted. And analysts say shipping rates are already starting to climb. Over in Israel, the country's highest court struck down a controversial judicial overhaul. That's the law that sparked months of huge protests across Israel before the war on Gaza began. It would have limited the High Court's power and given more control to lawmakers. But it divided Israel so much that some Israeli officials suspect the division impacted the military's readiness. And now political leaders, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, say they will not be fighting the latest ruling while they're focused on the war effort in Gaza. And speaking of the war in Gaza, Israel's military says it is now pulling thousands of troops out of the Gaza Strip. It's believed this reflects a new phase of war, one of lower intensity fighting between Israel and Hamas. Israel has been facing growing pressure to scale back now that nearly 22,000 Palestinians have been reported killed, and their homes, businesses, and healthcare systems have been gutted. Expect to hear more about the next phase of war soon, as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is expected back in Israel next week. Japan is cleaning up from a series of earthquakes that might not be over just yet. The largest quake was a magnitude 7.6. It started a fire and collapsed buildings on the west coast of Japan's main island. We know at least 30 people were killed, and rescue efforts are still underway. Meanwhile, more than a dozen strong quakes have continued in the Japan Sea, doing even more damage. and some major quakes could hit the area over the next week. Tsunami advisories are also in effect. So about 100,000 people have had to evacuate from coastal areas. President Biden says his administration has been in touch with the Japanese government and is ready to provide any assistance necessary. Millions of people in California also had to deal with days of dangerously high waves. Some parts of the state even saw some of the heaviest surf in years, like in Los Angeles County, where waves reached as high as 20 feet. Some communities had to evacuate, and dozens of national parks, beaches, and piers were closed. The rough conditions started last Thursday and lasted through yesterday. Some minor injuries were reported and beachfront properties were damaged, but now things finally seem to have settled down. More news is still coming up, but first, this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. This new year, I hope you can let go of the whole new year, new you thing, if that doesn't work for you, and instead focus on what's going right in your life already. Give yourself some credit. Being kind to yourself, feeling grateful, and finding your strengths are just a few of the things that therapy can help you do. And I can tell you from experience that usually a side effect of those things is that you actually become even more of the best version of yourself. Therapy has helped me figure out what is and isn't working in my life so I can set myself up for more good without any extreme resolutions necessary. If you're thinking about starting therapy, BetterHelp is an online-only option that is convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Celebrate the progress you've already made. Visit BetterHelp.com/newsworthy today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, BetterHelp.com/newsworthy. Okay, now back to the news. You might want to keep a mask handy for your next doctor's appointment. Some medical facilities are bringing back mandates in response to outbreaks of respiratory illnesses like COVID-19 and the flu. CDC data shows 31 states and Washington, D.C. are experiencing high or very high levels of people going to the doctor with complaints like fever, sore throat, or coughing. And hospitalizations are becoming more common, too. So many cities, states, and facilities are taking some precautions, saying they're trying to limit the impact on hospitals so they don't become too overwhelmed. And they say masks are among the most effective precautions out there. Though for now, mandates are mostly limited to healthcare facilities. At this point, no state in the country has any kind of statewide mandatory mask policy. The new free application for federal student aid, aka FAFSA, is finally here. The form was redesigned in response to bipartisan laws passed 3 years ago, meant to streamline the application process and help give more people access to scholarship and grant money. It has fewer questions and more data can be directly uploaded. The new form should also offer more opportunities for students from low and moderate income households to qualify for financial assistance, since it uses a new student aid index to estimate how much a family can afford to pay. Though some families will have less eligibility, like those with multiple children in college. Fair warning, the Education Department says users will only be able to access the form periodically for now, while it conducts site maintenance and makes technical updates. But officials say there's no need to rush to finish the application anyway, since they're not going to be sending results to schools until later this month. But the Washington Post points out it's best to fill out the form sooner rather than later, since funds are limited. We have a link to the new FAFSA listed in today's episode notes. Some of the most beloved Disney characters could be in for some new kinds of adventures. As of yesterday, the original black and white versions of Mickey and Minnie Mouse entered the public domain more than 95 years after being first introduced. And that means any creator now has the legal right to use the characters without needing to get permission and without having to pay. They can build upon them too, so they might find themselves in some uncharacteristic situations, like how Winnie the Pooh was turned into an R-rated horror film when it entered the public domain in 2022. That said, Disney still holds a separate trademark on Mickey as a brand identifier and corporate mascot, so there are still some limits on how the public can use the images. Like you can't start making merchandise and selling Mickey Mouse ears, for example. You can't try to trick anyone into thinking you're making a Disney production just because it has an original Mickey in it either. But other than that, people are being encouraged to get creative. The new Wonka movie has proven to be the biggest hit of this holiday season. It topped the New Year's weekend box office even on its third week in theaters. It was followed by the latest Aquaman movie, the animated movie Migration, the new version of The Color Purple, and the rom-com Anyone But You. Overall, the last weekend of the year pushed the film industry past $9 billion in box office sales for the year. That's up more than 20% from the year before, and the highest total since before the pandemic, even though Hollywood strikes forced some movies to push back their opening dates. A lot of the comeback had to do with the summer highs of Barbie and Oppenheimer that broke box office records, as well as the late addition of Taylor Swift, The Eras Tour, that set a new record for concert films. Speaking of Taylor Swift, she added one more accolade to her long list of accomplishments in 2023. On the final day of the year, she surpassed Elvis Presley's record for the most weeks for a solo artist at #1 on the Billboard 200 chart. She has spent 68 weeks atop the chart as compared to Presley's 67. Now, only the Beatles have more weeks at #1 than Swift. And of course, she's not stopping here. Swift is still re-recording some of her old albums, and there are 2 more to go, on top of any brand new material she may put out in the future. That's it for the main news today, so now it's time for Trivia Tuesday, when we ask a different trivia question every week. But first, instead of a sponsor today, I want to thank you for your support of The Newsworthy over the last year, for listening and for sharing the show. And I want to invite you to become a Newsworthy Insider in 2024. When you become an insider, you are helping to make sure we are able to keep providing this fast, fair, fun news every day. The more people who sign up, the less worried we have to be about filling all of our ad spots. We can focus on what really matters, keeping you informed so you can have better conversations and save time, all without arguing pundits, nonstop notifications, or never-ending doom and gloom. Once you become an insider, you provide some vital financial support to the show, and it only costs you $5 a month or less if you pay for the year. You get immediate access to ad-free episodes and some Ask Me Anything opportunities. So start your 7-day free trial now at thenewsworthy.com/insider. You can also find the link in our episode notes. Again, it's thenewsworthy.com/insider. No matter what, thank you so much for being here, for listening and supporting the show in whatever way you can. We are so grateful for you. Okay, now back to Trivia Tuesday. Today's trivia question is, what color do babies see first? You can play along with us in our weekly roundup email that comes out each Friday. Simply sign up to get it at thenewsworthy.com/email or find the link in today's episode notes. As for last week's trivia question, who was the last U.S. president with facial hair? The answer is William Howard Taft. It was 1913 when Taft and his famous mustache were replaced by clean-shaven Woodrow Wilson. And no president has donned facial hair since. As for the first president who entered the White House with facial hair, that honor goes to Abraham Lincoln. Well, that is, unless you count sideburns as facial hair. If you just look at beards and mustaches, there have been a total of 10 presidents with facial hair, all within the span of about 50 years. All right, thank you again for joining us and listening and sharing the show. We'll be back with another news roundup tomorrow. Until then, have a great day and Happy New Year.